Hello, welcome to the 18th episode of Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This episode is about 10 Cloverfield Lane, the 2016 film. Our next episode is going to be covering the Darren Aronofsky, Natalie Portman film Black Swan from 2010, and we're going to be having a guest for that episode, Monique Jenkinson, aka Phonique, who is just coincidentally my wife, performer.
I did not know that.
Yeah? Well, you'll meet her sometime. Yeah. And she's a performer and very immersed in theory as well. So very excited to hear what she has to say about it and take our breakfast art arguments to the podcast.
Yeah, she's going to be a great guest because she's so knowledgeable about that world.
Yeah.
And also just super smart in general. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what she has to say about it and what sort of different kind of insight she'll get out of it other than like, oh my God, girl's so hot naked, which was kind of my take.
That's all you remember at this point.
That's basically all I remember, and some rather good eye makeup.
So do you have anything to plug?
Yeah, I don't really do anything but this podcast, so please go check out all of our tentacles on the internet. So we have an Instagram account at scarythoughts.podcast. You can check us out over on Facebook. We've had quite a bit of conversation about the show lately, which is kind of fun, just different people.
Great.
A lot of Bay Area people, so if you're a Bay Area horror fan, it's kind of a good spot to get in there. And then any weird news or odd occult stories I can find on the internets, I'll sometimes aggregate them over there, which is I guess what the world is all about these days, and people seem to like that sort of thing. So please check that out. Whatever device you're listening to this on, please go rate it 5 stars. And a new thing we've started recently is our YouTube channel, which we read a necromarketer grimoire, and it advised that we put our show everywhere you could possibly put it. So we put it on YouTube, and in order to kind of crack through the algorithms that hide it, we need a few more thumbs up on those pages. So it's just Scary Thoughts on YouTube. And
it's pretty obvious. Just look for the eyeball and tentacles.
Yeah, Mark whipped up some pretty cool looking animations that I don't even know how you did them. They're pretty
so
cool.
Weird. Yeah.
And I'm very happy with them. So if you're at your office or something like that and feel like listening to it, give it a thumbs up.
Actually, speaking of plugs and YouTube, you were recently on a podcast.
Oh yeah, I was on my buddy's Comically Gaming. We were on there just discussing kind of podcasts in general. My buddy Nate, he has this really fun, I almost call it like a dad gamer show because it's him and his brother, and they talk about their kids a lot. And that's not really the focus of it, but being a non-child having person, that's sort of how I think about it a little bit. But it's a really good show. They're very passionate about video games and all the great nerdy dorkery stuff. And that's I believe episode 48.
Yeah, super fun.
Yeah, fun conversation with those guys. And really, one of the things that's been a lot of fun lately for me is just getting out there onto other people's podcasts. And eventually, if you're in the Bay Area and into horror movies and have some sort of neat little niche or something like that, just definitely reach out and have you on the show. We've had a lot of fun and success with our previous guests, Eugene S. Robinson and Nako.
And Peaches Christ.
Peaches Christ. That's our biggest episode of all time still, which is pretty great. And it's just fun to get out there. I still say it reminds me of being like in a punk band or something like that. You go play other people's shows. Sometimes you're the headliner, sometimes you're not. And just being part of a scene of people thinking about fun, interesting shows and movies, it's really nice. And it lets you stretch your mind a little bit on some stuff that's just kind of, that you could just passively enjoy. And another show I've been enjoying on YouTube is Deadly Analysis. Those guys are pretty smart. They do kind of like a roundtable conversation. Maybe we'll have them on or try to be on their show one day or something like that.
Right on.
Yeah.
Before we delve into 10 Cloverfield Lane, just want to give a heads up, a spoiler alert for the entire movie. We are assuming that you've seen it. This isn't a review show. So we're going to be talking to you about something we all know. And what we're probably going to start off with is sort of the extended universe of 10 Cloverfield Lane. So I guess we should be issuing an extra spoiler that we're going to be talking very upfront about the movie Cloverfield, which I don't think there's much to spoil necessarily. I don't think there's a way to ruin that movie. I think what you see is what you get.
It's hipster Godzilla.
Yeah.
A monster comes, crushes some shit. There's Steadicam footage.
Found footage style.
Found footage. I mean, it's a fun movie. And it was really enjoyable to watch at the time, and it had really fun marketing campaign, which we'll talk more about marketing and Cloverfield as we go on.
Well, I think let's just start there. It's not that I think that the extended universe of the Cloverfield universe is the most important thing, and that's why we should start off. But I think that because there's this bigger text happening with that universe, we should probably sort of cover it right off the top. And maybe I would assume, I mean, I knew before we were going to tackle this for a Scary Thoughts episode that there was a lot more to Cloverfield than just 2 movies. I knew that there was a bunch of stuff online, but I didn't know what it was, and I kind of didn't necessarily care too deeply because for me, Cloverfield was a good movie. I enjoyed it. 10 Cloverfield Lane, I thought was like great, and I saw it a couple of times before Scary Thoughts even. But it didn't drive me to go and do some groping around online, and I feel like maybe we should share with our listeners a bit about that just to sort of get them up to speed if they haven't done more geek work than we have.
Well, you sent me a text which was like, have you checked out the ARG for Cloverfield? And I had no fucking idea what you're talking about. Like, I didn't know that there was an extended Cloverfield universe. I took J.J. Abrams at his word, which was that this was just a movie kind of maybe in the same universe, but on a different timeline than the original Cloverfield movie. And that what they were kind of going for is that there was this general anthologized story that they were maybe going to keep going with, and they were going to be connected by maybe theme or feel rather than events. But you dig into the expanded universe online, and it is massive, it's connected, and there's a ton of interactive stuff to be found online, and in some cases the real world, that if you wanted to get really deep into geeking out on this movie, you could. I mean, there's hidden video games, hidden websites. Some of them connect to real news stories that are expanded on. And one of the things that's very clever about the extended universe is how it utilizes existing news stories and actual factual events to sort of weave into this broader narrative. Like there's a story about a North Korean satellite that gets utilized and stuff in the extended universe. And that's a real thing that happened. There was all this fear that North Korea's satellite was going to be directly over the Super Bowl. And then they may or may not have like set off an EMP blast. And that was something people that were legitimately afraid of at the time. And then it kind of played into the marketing campaign for these films.
There's no facts here, but how much do you feel that this was on a ratio of marketing to creative endeavor? Do you feel like the Cloverfield extended universe is?
Well, I think that I wouldn't call the Cloverfield extended universe a marketing scheme, because it's very creative. There's a text-based video game that's sort of supposed to teach you how to live in Howard's underground bunker. It was presumably designed by the character Howard to teach his daughter how to conserve resources, so when she came to live with him in the bunker, when the shit went crazy, she would know what to do. And it was built by one dude, which is incredible to me. Like, one game designer made it. And there's so much creativity and passion in all this stuff, and it's so interesting that to call it simply a marketing campaign, I don't think is quite right, but it is functionally a marketing campaign, and it for sure is. I mean, you have to think about this movie started its life as a script called The Cellar, which the director says by the time he got his hands on it, it had the big crazy reveal at the end, the big alien reveal. But I wouldn't be surprised if any of the crazy alien shit was not part of this original tight script, and it was added on. So you have this question of like, okay, this is a very clever, cool, interesting, fun movie. If it didn't say Cloverfield on the poster, would anybody have seen it? So is the extended universe's fun making people see this movie? I mean, a lot of people saw it, and it was made almost completely in secret. Like, really, the first time anybody heard about it was when these games started leaking online. And to me, it's amazing how broadly interacted with this is. There's Reddit forums, there's podcasts devoted to it, there's websites, there's huge fan forums. And that sort of thing is, I think, fun and brings people in. And it's unique and it's new, you know, like tying in like a live interactive game. People have done similar things in the past, but I don't think it's had as much of like fun attached to it as this.
Yeah, and it definitely plays into the ways in which we're seeing, say, comic book movies and the pardon me using this word every fucking episode, but intertextuality
Yep.
Within its universe and without its universe. And I think it's something you phrased as rewarding the efforts of fans. And this whole expanded universe definitely rewards the time and effort that fans put into maintaining their own websites and their own theories. And even I think today you pointed out that there is a podcast very well titled Cloverfields.
Yeah. If you guys want to get more into the extended universe of Cloverfield, and that's really something that you are passionate about after listening to this, definitely go check out Cloverfields. It's a little high energy for my tastes.
Yeah.
So, fair warning if you're one of these dark souls that doesn't like enthusiasm. But the two good dudes who host it, very passionate, super stoked. And somewhere along the way, I don't know what their history is, but they got Paramount's attention. So they have J.J. Abrams on the show. They have the director, Dan, on the show. And Dan Trachtenberg. And they do a really good, thorough job, a much better job than we're going to do in it, talking about all the little ins and outs of the extended universe. I mean, it goes pretty deep, and it even connects up into the broader J.J. Abrams universe with things like, there's a Kelvin gas station, which was in Super 8, and there's a USS Kelvin in Star Trek.
Yeah, and Slusho.
Yeah.
The beverage that pops up in every J.J. Abrams... Almost every J.J. Abrams property, including Star Trek for some damn reason.
Yeah, it's weird. The film critic Owen Gleiberman is where I kind of got the idea of rewarded fan exploration. And he discussed it with Bret Easton Ellis on the episode of the Bret Easton Ellis podcast that he was on. And he talks about how that the Marvel franchises really reward not just you sitting down and enjoying a film, which is really all, in his opinion, I think it should be. He's like, you should be able to just sit down and enjoy this film as is, which is something I think we could talk about a little bit later with this film. But for him, there's an extended product, which is the interaction with the Marvel comic universe. And that you are rewarded by the more of these films you've seen. Like, you have more information, you're discovering more Easter eggs, you're getting the extended scenes more, and it's fueling this online like arms race for like nerd knowledge. Like, people are like really invested in knowing everything about these films, and it really models the way comic books were sold in the late 80s and early 90s, where every single title had a tie-in with something else. So like, you're a huge X-Men fan, but now all of a sudden you have to go read boring ass New Mutants just to find out what happened to Logan when he walked off screen for like 2 seconds, or off page for 2 seconds.
Yeah. But thankfully, 10 Cloverfield Lane in and of itself is perfect as a self-contained movie.
Totally.
I feel that all of that extra relish and mustard and ketchup is totally unnecessary.
I will even go
for what I'm describing as a hot dog.
I would go as far as to say that the hot dog is even more enjoyable if you don't have any of that other bullshit.
I'm glad you said that. I totally agree. I think all of this extra text, which, let's flesh it out just a little longer and then just only talk about the movie in and of itself, because I feel like it is an interesting thing. But I found the further, personally, I went into it, the less interested I got in it. And I felt that it detracted from the movie quite a bit. And I forget, have you read the book House of Leaves?
Yes.
So, and maybe just for the listeners, House of Leaves, which is a book by Mark Z. Danielewski. Am I pronouncing that right? Yeah. It's basically a haunted house novel, but it's sort of like a story within a story within a story, and it's like found notes and archives, and there's an unreliable narrator. But what's particularly significant about the book is the way that it's written. It's sort of a cross between concrete poetry and the scrawlings of a madman on the page. So it's like infinite footnote layering, and it's visually incredibly chaotic. So you can't really read it beginning to end. You sort of have to jog back and forth, like if you're reading nonfiction that has footnotes, but in a more complicated matter than even that.
Yeah, a lot of people really love that book, and I think the core story is very cool.
I agree.
I really like it a lot. I don't like any of the bullshit that's attached to it. I feel like it's like somebody read David Foster Wallace, watched Poltergeist, and thought they could make a go of it. And a lot of the text stuff, like there's games, like every time the word house appears in the novel, it's in the color blue. And then there's all kinds of like typography tricks that are played throughout the book. It's interesting once, like there doesn't ever need to be another book like House of Leaves. And so on its own, I think it's a very impressive work, and it's really hard to even say anything critical about it in that, but it's just like, that's enough. Anything else is going to seem super trite if it tries to copy that.
Yes, but he has other books that employ the same methods, and he's actually in the middle of a 26-volume whole new piece. And it's interesting, I was at well, I was at Borderland. I don't want to talk about House of Leaves for too long because this episode's not about that, but I was at Borderland Books the other day and talking to them about Danielewski, and I was like, so is anybody else mining this territory, or can anybody mine this territory? Because it's so patented. I mean, it's sort of like, can anybody do Christopher Nolan movies, or does, he have the market cornered on that? Or like if someone does a really sort of mundane movie with a heroic twist at the end, do they just get accused of being M. Night Shyamalan? But House of Leaves is considered part of ergodic literature, which is a style of literature where reading takes a non-trivial effort from the reader. And interestingly, J.J. Abrams has sort of like influenced that genre of fiction. And I feel that idea of ergodic literature is definitely what we're seeing with the Cloverfield universe, because it makes you seek out extra text. It requires a certain amount of effort. Thankfully, not that much. I mean, Hollywood is not going to require too much of you the way, say, literature tends to. A Hollywood film is rarely going to make the audience work. Yeah. Whereas in literature, there's a lot more opportunity for expecting more of a reader.
Yeah, that said, there are a few little things that they used in the extended, I guess, elements of this film, the extended assets of this film, that do require you to be a little fucking clever. Like there's a website that you go into and you have to find out what the password is to get into another section of it. And then there's a conversation between the character Howard and his daughter and presumably his ex-wife. And then there's a link, and the link takes you to a sound file. And the sound file just plays some music. And then there's like beeping. It's like, do-do-do-do-do-do-do. And to me, like my first thought was like, okay, Howard's supposed to be in the Navy. This is probably Morse code. So I bet there's an embedded signal here. So I go look that up, and it turns out that it's not. It's even crazier than that. Like that little noise can be transformed into an image.
Yes.
And then that image is, I believe it was the oil rig from Cloverfield, right?
Yeah.
Which is a little weird because then that means it's sort of tying the original Cloverfield to this, even though J.J. Abrams is explicit that exists in different timelines. Yeah. So I feel like the extended universe, I would not be surprised if they got pretty far down the road in making it and then just realized that they couldn't retcon it well enough. So they just declared it a separate universe.
I think so.
It has a bit of that, like, this is almost genius, but then it kind of falls apart, which is what everybody said about Lost.
But that's exactly, okay, yeah. So my hater take on this movie that I actually love is that the more I read about it, the more it reminds me of Lost. And I will say, I really want to blame someone for Lost, because I feel like I watched the entire series and feel like every hour was wasted because of how they were just so, without a rudder as a creative team. Mm-hmm. And I can't blame J.J. Abrams. He wasn't actually part of Lost for that long. Mm-hmm. But there's a commonality there where it seems like people are throwing ideas at a universe, whether they stick or not, and whether there's a plan for them or not. However, again, thankfully, 10 Cloverfield Lane is very self-contained, and actually is a very involved form of self-contained. Mm-hmm. I mean, one thing that I really, really appreciate about it is that it creates this world where, like, it's not even Chekhov's gun. It's like everything in this movie is Chekhov's gun.
Yeah.
There's the VHS copy of Cannibal Airlines, and then the movie ends with this big flying ship trying to eat her, like where when Emmitt is making the puzzle and he goes, the cat's face looks deformed, and then John Goodman's character has his face melted.
Yep.
Or, her skills as a fashion designer help her to make the suit, and she's watching Pretty in Pink, and Pretty in Pink, the character that Molly Ringwald plays, is learning fashion. So like every element keeps feeding in to the universe. Nothing is wasted. It's incredibly economical.
Yeah, the word I kept using to describe the film itself was it was very tight.
Yeah.
Like there's not anything wasted. And then the foreshadowing, when you watch the film a second time or, however many times you watch it, those elements become more prominent. Like you see in the very first scene, she grabs the bottle of whiskey that she uses in the very last scene.
Yes.
And then he refers to it in the middle like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't have enough time to grab that booze. I wish I had. Which all that stuff, it means something. And then, so in that sort of ethic for this film, all this other stuff sort of means something too. And I think that I have to give the extended universe stuff a lot of credit because this is a new way of telling a story. It's very cool that you would use multiple media inputs to create this universe that people can hold in their heads and people interact with it, and it's very fun for people. But I will say that the tension is ruined by the knowledge of Howard's history, right? Because one of the fun things about the film, if you don't know anything about the extended universes, is Howard really insane? And you don't really find out until the very end, and then that reveal is really fun. Because I'm so glad I didn't know about any of this extra shit before I saw 10 Cloverfield Lane, because the movie was very suspenseful to me. And I was like, man, this is so much fun. And is he crazy? Who knows? And every piece of information you get, it's like the puzzle, right, that they're putting together in the middle of the film. Every piece that you get kind of fills it in a little bit. But like that puzzle, there's missing pieces. And you're sort of, what are those? Like, where are they? Why are they not in here? This dude is so meticulous about everything. There's no way he would have lost pieces to a puzzle. He would have probably fucking murdered whoever lost those pieces. Probably did, actually. That's probably what happened to that first girl. But yeah, so I think I feel good enough about tabling the extended universe for the rest of this discussion and just saying, hey, go check it out if you're into this film, if you didn't know about it. Like I didn't. There's more than enough. There's the Cloverfield Reddit page is awesome for this stuff.
Yeah, and there are actually some really good fan theories that are not really well addressed in the extended universe. Mm-hmm. There's actually a lot of really interesting perspectives and ways through the plot that I certainly never would have thought of. But let's talk about whether he's sane or not, because that for me is what's most interesting about this movie. Really, is his conspiratorial brain.
Yeah, so maybe we could take a second to walk through the plot a little bit if people need reminding. So it opens with the main character, Michelle. She looks out a window in New Orleans, and that's my favorite. When I first saw that, I was like, oh my God, because I'm from New Orleans. Listeners and friends will know. And there's that picture of the bridge that goes over to the West Bank, and it's like the Mississippi River, and like, whoa, that's so iconic, but not the New Orleans you're ever shown on TV, And she puts down her wedding, an engagement ring, and she grabs her stuff, and she's very in a huff, and then she leaves. So you get the feeling like some breakup has happened. She's leaving town. Then her boyfriend calls her, and the boyfriend is actually voiced by Bradley Cooper, which is a weird little thing. And she hangs up on him, and then she's run off the road. Oh, you don't know that at first, but she's basically in some sort of accident, and she wakes up in this basement. And John Goodman's character, Howard, has fixed her up, but the dungeon room looks very rapey and has a very Saw kind of vibe. So you're immediately, it's suspenseful. It's like, oh my God, this creep is in a dungeon and he's going to do terrible shit to her. As it goes on, he's actually said he saved her life. And the reason why he saved her life is there's some sort of catastrophe has happened. They're safe in a bunker, and they have another dude named Emmitt who's down there with them. And the rest of the film is about whether or not the event that they think has happened, or that Howard claims to have happened, has happened. And that's the most interesting tension in the film to me, is whether or not this doomsday event has actually occurred.
Yeah, and the film is constantly vacillating back and forth, because you get a piece of evidence that he's correct, and then you get a piece of evidence that he's insane, which sort of, until you get to the end, sort of nullifies maybe that, when he seems more crazy, the evidence that he's correct sort of gets erased. And it's constantly ratcheting back and forth between he's sane and correct, he's crazy, and they're genuinely solely prisoners.
Yeah, and then there's an interesting fan theory that like Emmitt is actually the villain.
Yes.
Which I think is kind of interesting, but I don't think there's not a lot of on-screen evidence to support that. Yeah. And on the poster of this movie, it says monsters come in many forms, which is, if you're looking at this and thinking of it as a Cloverfield movie, you're thinking like, okay, where's the monster going to be in this movie? And then the trailer really makes it out to be like John Goodman's character is actually the monster. But there's this idea that like the character Emmitt has actually been the person who's like kind of making things weird and making things bad. Like he's actually introducing the chaos into the environment, because John Goodman's character is technically correct. There has been some terrible shit that happens that kills everybody, and they are actually safer and surviving in the bunker. But two things can be true at the same time. He might also be an awful, terrible person, but is he an awful, terrible person because he's been bearing this burden of knowledge of some sort of imminent doomsday event coming?
Well, that's a funny thing. I think there is one thing that I will say pulling from the extended universe is helpful with, is that John Goodman worked for a company that gave him firsthand knowledge into the alien attack before it happened. Mm-hmm. So what I think that does is he may have been perfectly sane and driven crazy with this weird knowledge mm-hmm. that he was given, that it's what made him drive his wife and daughter away and build this bunker and kidnap a surrogate for his two surrogates for his daughter mm-hmm. plus Emmitt.
And that's utterly Lovecraftian.
How so?
Well, I mean, the idea that like the knowledge of some sort of creature from space is coming and it drives you slowly mad.
Right. Yeah. So I think that knowing that he's not just a conspiracy theorist who happened to be right, but that he is someone who had knowledge before anyone else of this alien attack. And so he knew what to do, not just because he has the ear to the ground, mm-hmm. but because of the happenstance of his employment, I think is pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting how, like, as you learn more and more little clues, a person who seemed previously silly or incorrect becomes vilified. I mean, a really major example is in the Mitt Romney-Obama debate, where when the moderator asked Mitt Romney, you know, what's a big threat? And he's like, don't you take your eyes off the fucking Russians, man. Their shit is off the chain. And then Obama's like, it's not the Cold War. And then Donald Trump. You know? So I mean, it's like this whole idea of, you know, this movie plays with conspiracy and what it does to you and whether or not it's real. Like the character Emmitt says that Howard has a black belt in conspiracy, and you know, you get hints that he has his conspiracies mixed up a little bit, because at one point he says, it could be the Russians. Okay, well, if you know that this is like a fucking space worm and it's coming to like eat everybody's face, why are you involving the Russians in here? Like, is George Soros also to blame? You know, is there a Zionist plot tied into these aliens? Like,
I mean, here's the thing: there's a fine line between knowing a piece of truth that is totally insane mm-hmm. and then trying to grapple with the other puzzle pieces that make it possible. You know, if you're trying to accommodate, like, honestly, like, let's just say you, Chad, mm-hmm. suddenly know about an alien invasion and you're living in a world where you're the only person who knows about this alien invasion. What other kind of mental gymnastics are you going to have to do to accommodate that knowledge and then go like, well, what else is true then? What else am I being lied to? What else is being covered up? You're going to come to some just fucking wacky ideas, and there's an infinity online of information for you to draw from that's going to send you in every direction on your quest.
Mm-hmm. And especially now, it's so hard to vet actual information. And then there's a really cool website called conspiracypsychology.com, and it's written by like actual psychologists. And one of the things they examine on this website is why people believe in conspiracies and what kind of conspiracies people tend to believe in. And one of the things that's very interesting is that if you believe in one conspiracy, you are more likely to believe in a second conspiracy. And if you believe in a second, and it goes on and on and on. And what's very strange is there are conspiracies that later turn out to be true. So, you know, COINTELPRO, Operation Northwoods, like there's all these MK Ultra, they're all real, right? So you read about that sort of thing and you're like, okay, well, someone was lying in the government at that point. So maybe this other thing is also a lie. Yep. And then like you're just a hop and a skip away to Alex Jones territory, you know. And the thing that's really interesting about Alex Jones is he's broken some legit stories. He was out front on some shit. And
Pizzagate, for example.
Let the record show that Alex Jones has now disavowed Pizzagate. But you know, here's the thing about Pizzagate, right? Is within the month of, you know, all these online libertarian conspiracy theorists talking about like a Hollywood connection with sex trafficking, they bust a massive sex trafficking ring in LA. So are they connected? Probably not. But to the mind of the conspiracist, there's more and more evidence.
Confirmation,
like you're adding in these tiny little things. And, you know, there's also conspiracy communities, right? So you'll find yourself maybe pushing yourself further and further away from other people with like normie ideas, you know?
Yeah.
And that's where you get into like 4chan territory, where like these people are like creating.
Oh, I'm just picturing the space worms with Pepe's face on it coming down from the sky.
I mean, like really, when you think about the broader science fictional universe, they're biomechanical beings that put you in the territory of Stargate. Stargate's ancient alien gods. Kek is an ancient alien god with Egyptian overtones. I mean, it all fits there.
Thank you for doing that work for us.
Yeah, if you want to get even crazier than that, John Goodman plays the character Walter Sobchak in The Big Lebowski. That character is based on John Milius, who wrote Homefront. Homefront is, of course, the novelization of the video game that involves the North Korean satellite exploding over the United States. So it's all there. It's all there, right?
The facts are in plain sight.
Yeah, like it's all there, man. Like you just like have to look at it. But you could, if I was serious about that sort of tract, I can add in some stuff about the North Korean satellite, different other actual factual events that occurred, and build myself a weird little narrative. And if nobody else is there to check me, I can find myself in pretty deep, weird territory. But what if you're right? That's the thing that's always in the back of people's mind is like, okay, well, what if you're right? I mean, the explosion of flat earther interest is insane to me. All these people who have, like, they'll go watch some internet video, like some YouTube video, and the guy sounds pretty smart to a Yahoo, you know, like even to me, like I look at it and go, well, I have no real way of evaluating this dude's astrophysics lesson that he just gave me because I don't know shit about astrophysics, but I'm just going to trust that this actual astrophysicist says he's a dickhead. What if that astrophysicist is a tool of the Illuminati? Like that's like where the mindset goes,
of course,
you know. There's an interesting podcast with Eddie Bravo, who's a famous jiu-jitsu guy who's also got himself a black belt in conspiracy theory. He's on Joe Rogan's show the other day, and he's sort of veering in the territory of being a flat earther. And for Joe Rogan, that is a line too far. He's like, look, man, all this other shit, I'm with you on the JFK assassination. Maybe we didn't go to the moon, all this other stuff. Like there's all these things that are sort of tenable conspiracy, but the flat earth is just too far, right? But Eddie Bravo is just not, he's just constantly defending like, well, how do you know that? They'll tell him something. It's like, well, how do you know that? And he'll say, well, because I heard it from this guy. Well, how does that guy know it? And it's this endless chain of like, show me the proof. But it just goes on forever. And it reminds me of this woman I used to wait on at the meat company I worked at. She was this Russian lady, and came up and she'd be like, how do I know lamb is organic? I'd be like, well, it's certified organic. She's like, well, how do I know a certification is legit? I'm like, well, the government backs it. She's like, well, how do I know if government is doing a good job? And it went on like that forever, and it became super weird and circular.
All you can say is it's turtles all the way down.
It is, you know, and at a certain point, you just have to fucking buy the lamb. And, you know, hopefully you're buying decent lamb and not something fucked up. Like, you know, like John Goodman's character here could easily have been super crazy, and none of this stuff was actually true. You know, like one way this movie could have gone is at the very end, she pulls off the mask and it's just birds and just cuts to black.
Yeah.
You know, that's a way this film could have ended. And it would have been, I think...
Well, it's kind of how I expected it to end.
I did too. I never expected there to be a crazy alien attack at the very end of it. I don't know that I love that ending. Mm-hmm. But, you know, because it affirms John Goodman's whole shtick, you know. And when you watch this movie the second time, John Goodman, it's kind of like when you watch Fight Club the second time, Marla Singer becomes a sympathetic character. Like, to me, the second time through, John Goodman is no longer a monster. He's a very sad, sympathetic character who really did save her life, really did save Emmitt's life.
Right, but we are also living in, speaking of all this, Alex Jones and all that, while we're watching this heavy emergence of conspiracy theory culture, we're also taking an almost reality TV pleasure in The Crank, right?
Yeah.
I definitely do. I like when I hear flat earthers talk, I get a little bit of Real Housewives delight in how completely fucking stupid that person is, and how wrong they are. And when you watch John Goodman the first time in this movie, Howard, you kind of get a bit of that. Like it's horrifying because they're in this trapped space, and the consequences of his crazy are real. But he is that absurd crank. I mean, he drops the word alien like right up front. Yeah. It's totally in passing. And that's when she gets like that, as if she could be even more scared.
And the script is so good because it mobilizes those little lines to crank up the horror of this film. And it really, like, you see the fear in her face, and like it's like she realizes that, oh my god, like this guy is off the reservation. So she's not dealing with simply a sexual predator who's caught her and wants one thing. Like she's even more fearful because she has no fucking idea. Right. And then Emmitt seems half retarded. Really, he's like a dude who I never went 40 miles away, and I was going to go to college, but I couldn't handle it, so I got fucking hammered.
Wait, did you just refer to someone as stupid and then put on a Southern accent?
Well, that's how he sounds. I'm imitating his character. I would never besmirch the South.
Okay, good.
Yeah, to quote Gary Sinise in The Stand TV show, "Country don't mean dumb." So...
Thank you, Stephen King. Yeah. I mean, there are two levels of crazy that John Goodman is operating with here, whether he is correct or not. One is the conspiracy theories that he's spinning his wheels on. And the other is we're getting this back and forth about why he kidnapped her and whether the accident was her fault and did he save her, cause the act, But, I mean, the fact of the matter is, there is a dungeon room in that bunker. Like, think of if you have a bunker and space is at a premium, you've got storage everywhere. Well, that was a room with nothing stored in it that could lock from the outside, and there's evidence that he did this to another girl before. This is very subtle. I didn't notice this until I read it online, but someone pointed out that as soon as he kills Emmitt, the next time you see John Goodman, it's the next time you see Howard, he's shaved. It's the first time in this film that he's shaved. So, like, there is something really deeply fucked up happening in his head that is separate from his survivalist instincts and his conspiracy knowledge.
Yeah, that room that she's, like, her room is really interesting because half of it's painted pink. And half of it's like a dungeon, and there's different ideas that I came with was like, okay, it's the most defended room in the whole place. So, okay, it's either his dungeon where he's keeping somebody in there, or it's where he would protect the thing that was most important to him, or both. And there's a really interesting, like, this movie uses its space so well to tell its story. Like, when she first goes up to the top, and, well, not the first time she goes to the top. When she goes up to the top, when she tries to make her jailbreak, and she sees the woman, the neighbor who's like all fucked up from the whatever it is, and she realizes that it's true. Like, she's heard Emmitt say something like, oh, there was a big old explosion, and she kind of doesn't believe him because she thinks he could be influenced by Howard or maybe in cahoots or something like that. But when she realizes that, yes, there is something serious going on out there, she comes back down, and then Howard re-puts the burned out bulb. He changes the burned out bulb in her room into a bright bulb, and the room lights up. And then she starts decorating, and it kind of becomes her home. It's interesting that the room is used to kind of change the mood a little bit. And then if you notice, the camera work doesn't show the grimy side of the dungeon anymore when he's talking to her. Like, the room that she's in, where she's most trapped, sort of it's just shown in a way that makes it seem lighter and safer. So the room becomes either like a prison or a place of safety, depending on how the camera moves. It's really, really well done. I mean, I don't think this movie got enough credit when it came out for like that sort of thing.
Yeah. Definitely. You brought up the ideas around hypersanity and the Joker specifically from The Dark Knight, but I guess the Joker across all instances. Wondering if you wanted to elaborate on what you were thinking.
Yeah, so there's this concept of hypersanity. Sometimes it gets called supersanity. And so the idea is that there's a level of sanity that everybody has that is actually everybody lying to each other. So sane is, oh, it's cool, we're going to go get brunch tomorrow. Oh, I got to go to work later. I'm going to save up for a vacation. Like, you're just moving along. And the whole time you're ignoring the fact that mankind is and always will be at war, that you will die, that you're on a rock flying through space and void, that every environment on this planet is out to kill you, like that all the bad shit that you fear, all the things in the dark that bump, they're all real, and that you're just sort of like pushing that out of your mind to maintain sanity, to be able to deal with a normal life. And the hypersane person is the person who realizes that all this shit is real, and they may or may not make preparations for it, but the more hypersane you become, the more insane you will appear. And so your Lacanian theorists and your Zizek types, they'll ask the question, is there a difference between insane and hypersane? To the outside observer, there isn't. And we always bring this story up, but the Zizek story where he's like, you're in Eastern Europe and you order a cup of coffee with cream, and they're like, we don't have cream. And then you say, well, I'll have it black then. Like you have a choice. Like, do you have a choice? Is there a difference between hypersane and insane? And I think that externally, probably not, but internally, yes. So a lot of the conversation around hypersanity, for whatever reason, I guess he's just a great example of it, is the Joker. So the idea is that the Joker is hypersane because he's realized all of these. He realizes actually how bad Gotham is. Like, he sees Gotham for what it is. And because he sees it for what it is, he has this higher ability to manipulate it. So you see this played out really well in Christopher Nolan's Batman series. And like Heath Ledger's Joker is probably the best example of the hypersane Joker. And that Joker is sort of based on the Killing Joke Joker, which is an all-time great graphic novel and involves the character of the Joker. It actually has kind of like a non-canonical origin story for the Joker, where he sort of is involved in this plot and his whole world falls apart. This plot to rob some chemicals and his world falls apart, and he gets thrust into being the Joker from being a normal guy. But he's better able to deal with the horrors of Gotham by becoming the Joker. So the question would be like, is Howard hypersane? Like, is he a monster because he is seeing the world for it is? And I think that I would say yes. I think that he is correct in dealing with the world as it is in this universe. If there was anything else he should have done, he should have shot Emmitt right away, like when he came in through the door. So that leads me to think that maybe he still has humanity, which puts him at a disadvantage, because ultimately he's killed by his own warped kindness, like by letting these two people in, when he should have just shut the door and waited it out.
So how's what you're describing different from being hyper-rational?
Well, so hyper-rationality is connected to hypersanity. So the idea is like, if you were always rational all the time, like for instance, Ayn Rand's outlook is hyper-rational, right? It's also hyper-selfish and makes you an asshole, but following everything super logically in this cold manner, in the way that maybe like an evil Vulcan might, it's going to distance you from other people, and it's going to set you apart from, kind folk or decent folk or whatever. But you're going to be isolated. I mean, the really strong position would be in a group of hypersane individuals, which would be like Immortan Joe and the War Boys from Fury Road. Like, that would be a hypersane society. And of course, it's horrific and barbaric. But an individual hypersane person is always going to be at a disadvantage in opposition to the group. And you see this in, what's the Will Smith movie where he's... I Am Legend.
7 degrees.
In
6 degrees of separation.
Yeah. So you see this in I Am Legend, where at the big reveal at the end of the book, I Am Legend, spoiler alert, okay, go read I Am Legend, is that the character that's played by Will Smith in the movie, if you've seen that, he is the monster. And then all the creatures are the vampires. They're just the new normal. So the vampire creatures, they're not actually that bad. They just have to live in the dark because they're vampires now. And he's the monster that's killing all of them. So he's the hypersane individual. and also the monster. So you would eventually become so correct. I mean, you see a little bit of this with like Sam Harris, right? Like Sam Harris is sort of, I think, a good example of a person in the public eye who's sort of becoming hypersane. Like he's responding to with this like ultra rational approach to like actual harms caused by certain segments of the society. But is his attention to that sort of stuff pushing him away from other people? And is it causing more harm? Like, you know, he always says like, it's not phobic, like in response to Islamophobia. It's not phobia if what you believe is correct. Like if you believe like, look, he says, I can go to Live Leak and watch all these cultists cut people's heads off like for hours if I wanted to. So that's a real fear. But at what point does the real fear warp him and separate him from society? You know, and I think he's fucking his career up with this. I mean, is he right? I don't know. I mean, I'm not a scholar of that. But, you know, to bring it back to the film, if you knew the bad stuff was coming and you knew it would make you a monster to prepare for it, would you still do it? I don't know.
I think that's a very interesting comment. It's not so common in horror films, but certainly in horror literature.
Yeah.
The becoming the monster that you most fear.
Well, let me ask you that. What did you think worked really well in this film from like a film craft perspective? What did you really like? Did you respond to the soundtrack at all? Like it has that really big Bear McCreary soundtrack.
You know what? I didn't notice it. I did notice the incidental music soundtrack, but whatever. I thought they were sort of more amusing choices than anything else. The thing that struck me most about the movie were what I said before, which is the economy of the script and the shots and the placement and how nothing is wasted and everything comes back around. And John Goodman, I mean, I think, you know, I almost feel bad for the actors playing Emmitt and Michelle because he just owns this movie so goddamn hard.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they call these bottle stories.
Bottle episode, yeah.
Bottle episodes,
and I think that's one of my favorite things about the TV show Community is its exploration of the bottle episode. But so the expression bottle episode is in television. Actually, the expression came from Star Trek, where the crew would call it a ship in a bottle episode. And the idea was that TV shows would have an episode in the series, usually later in a season, where it would take place in one location. And ostensibly, they could save a lot of money because they wouldn't have to use multiple sets and extra characters and move around. And sometimes it would end up actually costing more money because they would have to juggle so many ideas to make it happen. Essentially, a bottle episode comes to mean like it all takes place in one location. And they're often very boring because it means that the screenwriters are really grasping for a way to make things exciting happen when they're used to being able to play with location. And this is a bottle episode, and I think a very successful one, even though it's not a TV series, where everything's very, very contained. But then they use that to its full advantage, where everything's very contained. Ideas are contained. Despite the expanded universe elements, this movie in and of itself is incredibly contained.
Yeah.
Not just in location.
Yeah, totally. Another thing I really liked about this is how competent the characters are. Like everybody, I mean, Emmitt's kind of a goofball, but he has like his like outlook on life that kind of gets him through the world. You know, he has like a sense of humor that sort of that is unappreciated by Howard, but carries him through life. But the characters have like an almost Cormac McCarthy character level of competency. Like in No Country for Old Men, where it's like, I'm going to turn out the lights before I stand behind the bed so the guy can't see me in the room through the bottom. You know, like all these little tiny steps that these characters take, I think are really cool. And I really like the main character as well. Like I think on your recommendation, I'm reading. I realized I hadn't actually read it. I thought I'd read it, but Men, Women, and Chainsaws. And it's interesting how that book. You wonder, like, did it codify what it was talking about, or is it just observing? Because it seems like
it observed a lot of films before it came out, and certainly a lot of horror films rely on that text at this point. But it really was referring to a history of cinema before it was written.
Character Michelle, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, she's such a perfect final girl character.
How do you mean?
Well, you know, she's she's in the dark place, like in Men, Women, and Chainsaw. They talk about like the setting being the dark place, and this is the bomb shelter's perfect. Like she's almost like simultaneously the princess caught in the dungeon and the hero coming to rescue herself. That's just kind of one of those tropes from Men, Women, and Chainsaws, that the final girl is actually a very powerful character.
Yeah.
And then the dinner scenes have like that sort of tension from like Texas Chainsaw Massacre dinner scenes and stuff.
Well, bringing all this up actually makes me think of another thing that I really enjoyed about this film is the way it plays with genre. Is because when you first see it, I mean, there's very little dialogue until quite far into the film, all things considered. But then, like, it's kind of like a siege film, like Green Room, but then it turns out to not be, and it threatens to. At the beginning, you just think this is torture porn, like you referred to Saw, but it's totally not. It being called 10 Cloverfield Lane, if you ignore the previews, you come at it with an expectation of alien invasion, which it isn't until the last 15 minutes or however long that is. Yeah. And then it is a bottle episode, but it's always playing back and forth, and it's oscillating between genres the way it's oscillating between is he crazy or is he sane.
Yep.
So this film is always pushing and pulling. It's always undermining your expectations, not just along one storyline, but even in terms of the genre expectations.
Yeah.
Another thing, if I may.
Yeah, please.
Another thing I really appreciated about it, and this is sort of related to the idea of genre, is that I'm finding, as we're very immersed in apocalypse culture, apocalypse narratives, and the way that, for example, extends into superhero films, where, I mean, we don't necessarily think about superhero films as apocalypse narratives, but most of them are, like how many of them, there's a big column of light that goes between New York and the sky, and we're going to be destroyed by Loki and his buddies, or some evil mastermind who's going to destroy the world. Like, the stakes in these movies are so often very, very, very high.
Yep.
And for me, I find that the higher the stakes, the less I care. Of course, there's actually a psychological equation that I probably should have looked up for this episode, but actually Sam Harris brings up this idea often, where if you see a photo of a starving child, you feel sympathy. Biologically, you feel sympathy. If you see 2, you actually feel a little less. If you see 5, you feel less. If you're, and if you hear like 100,000 people are starving in Africa, you feel less sympathy than if you hear about 1. Our sympathy is inversely proportional to the quantity of people suffering. And I find that is true of me with film investment in the stakes in the narrative, that if a whole city is going to be destroyed, I'm like, like Independence Day, like, I don't really care. But when it's 2 people fighting, you really get into the characters and you get sympathy and you get under their skin. And what I love about this movie is that it's sort of part of an apocalypse narrative.
Yep.
It's about Earthlings fighting for their survival, but it's 3 people. And so I love that the stakes are, in a certain sense, very low. This is just this one young woman trying to get out of a bunker.
Right.
But actually, it's the part of the bigger story of the survival of the human race.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing with 28 Days Later. That's basically 4 people wandering around. Yeah. It's in some ways a bottle episode because it all takes place in that weird little taxi cab. Not all of it, but, there's a little tight community running around. What do you think about the ending? I mean, I want to come back to some other stuff, but I do want to kind of talk about how it ends. It has a very big ending for such a small, tight movie.
I think it's so hokey and ridiculous that I was totally on board. I think because by the time you are sitting through a movie of an hour and 40 minutes of the movie, at least for me, it's such a good plot that I'm completely wrapped up in it. The Cloverfield idea is just long gone in my head. That I think it's a beautiful reveal. I think it's a beautiful twist.
Yeah, I think it goes on a little longer. I think the perfect place to have ended this film would have been when she's standing up. There's two places. If the extended universe didn't exist and this film was simply the cellar, I think the moment where she takes off her mask and hears the birds chirping would have been a phenomenal spot to just end this movie. Like, you never see an alien. You don't know what the fuck is going on. And then there's also, like, even when you do hear the birds and stuff, there still could be fallout. Like, that's one of the things I remembered from the book and the film On the Beach, the nuclear survival novel, is there's this whole thing about how the rabbits that they're looking at there's a scene where a couple of the characters are looking at some rabbits wandering around. And the guy's like, these rabbits will outlive the human race by a year because the fallout doesn't affect them as fast for whatever reason. So just because you're hearing birds doesn't mean it's not fucking bad news for humans, So like there's that level operating, but I think that would have been a great spot to end this. But then Bad Robot, J.J. Abrams gets a hold of it, puts it in the extended universe, and then they add on a layer that I think is kind of interesting. They talk about how the Cloverfield universe is sort of concepted as like Twilight Zone episodes, and that the ending of this movie is like a big ass Twilight Zone episode, and I do like that. And so if you wanted to include the aliens in the extended universe, I think when she sees the ship coming in, the smaller ship coming in on the horizon, and she's like, what the fuck? I think that would have been a great spot to end it.
It would have been a little pat. A little...
But do you think that's better than her, like, throwing a Molotov cocktail into, like, the anus worm face to blow it up?
Into the Death Stars.
Like, that, to me... is
exhaust shaft port, whatever.
It's a little like, it makes her character go from being like a cool kind of resourceful badass into verging on Mary Sue territory for me.
Who's Mary Sue?
Like, Mary Sue, it's kind of a derogatory term for like a female character that is badass for no real reason. Like, she's just badass just cuz. Like, a good example is maybe the character Rey from Force Awakens. Like, why does she know how to beat all these people's asses? She hasn't really had any training or whatever. She's just tough just because she's the female lead. It's a term that gets used by the critics from different sides of like political orientations. Like, it's like a Mary Sue character is sort of lazy, but it's also sort of unrealistic in a way. Like, the little girl from Kick-Ass is another example. Like, an 8-year-old girl isn't beating anyone's ass. There's just no way. It's just physically impossible.
But Nicolas Cage is her dad, Chad.
Oh, well, that does give you a little bit of extra toughness, I guess. But even then. But, like, that... just the whole making the Molotov cocktail and throwing it perfectly in the thing's mouth is kind of ridiculous to me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I just wish she could have, like, there could have been something else done. But I do love the very, very end of the film when she picks up the radio signal and she's on this crossroads. And it's like, come here if you want to escape. Come to Baton Rouge if you want to escape. Go to Houston if you want to fight. And there's this whole through line through the whole movie where she's like always been running away. She always runs away. She always runs away. And she decides that she wants to go fight. And then she turns left and goes down I-10 and headed towards Houston. And there's such a cool shot. There's lightning, and you see the silhouette of an enormous ship in the lightning. And it's just such a cool looking shot. I actually took a screen capture of it. It was probably going to be our Instagram post for this episode.
Well, it's also really great because it means that the film starts where it ends, which is her driving. And in the beginning, she's fleeing. And in the end, she's fleeing, but this narrative of how she tends to run away from her problems. But this whole story, again, is she trying to get away from a problem, or is she actually better off staying? That's another back and forth, is the should I stay or should I go? Is she running from her problems, or is she taking them on? Is she incorrect in her assessment of the safety of the bunker, or is she actually in the torture dungeon and she needs to get out as quickly as possible?
Yeah, I mean, thinking about like that, there actually is a war going on, and they talk about how the humans are winning the eastern southern seaboard. They're like kind of fighting back, so which makes total sense because Louisiana would totally be able to beat the shit out of the aliens, as would Texas. I think California's going to be in trouble. But, I mean, come on. Are they going to kale them to death? I mean, it's not going to work. But do you think if they had picked up that radio signal, do you think Howard would have wanted to go join in the fight? Because he would have been able to. What do you think Howard's response to knowledge of a human counterstrike would have been?
I don't know. His radio, he wouldn't necessarily believe what he was hearing. Mm-hmm. He does have a radio. I don't know that it picks up AM, FM. It must. I mean, for him to be also, even if it didn't, he must have an AM or FM radio. He's got to be that prepared, but he wouldn't necessarily believe what he was hearing. And there's also the possibility that broadcast was not broadcast for the weeks previously.
Total
it could have been
right.
Yeah.
They're like, come to Houston, and Houston's surrounded by fucking alien ships. It's like, anyone who knows how to fight, come this way. Okay.
Yeah. So speaking of Howard possibilities, so what would you say is his D&D alignment?
I'm going to say lawful neutral.
Really? You don't think he's chaotic neutral?
He's too organized for chaotic. Like, I would say that...
But behavior patterns.
Well, I don't...
Easy to anger.
Yeah, he's easy to anger.
Very easy to anger. And very easy to passivity. I mean, he gets a bottle broken over his face, and it's like, an hour later, it's like it never happened.
Well, I think he understands why she did it. And he kind of forgives her because it's like, hey, look, this definitely seems pretty fucking crazy, but you have proof now, so you have to settle down. But it brings us back to the missing girl. If the missing girl was not an element at play in this, and the fact that she finds the word help scratched into this glass and finds the girl's earring covered in blood, which is, who knows how that happened. And then there's the whole, that's not a picture of her. And there's another fan theory that, Emmitt is lying to her.
Yeah.
And when I watched it again, I watched his face really, really close to see maybe if the actor was giving a clue away. And to me, it seemed like he was lying. I felt who knows, right? That actor might not even had knowledge of the script being that far. Who knows? But if I was looking at this as a real person looking in real person...
Right.
I think the actor played it a little bit weird, And then one of the fan theories is that Emmitt actually used the bunker to disappear a girl.
Right.
Which I don't like. How would he get in?
Yeah,
I think that theory is bad. But is he maybe in on it? Was he in on the original disappearance? Because he's the helper. He's down there doing all that stuff. But why would he have kidnapped that girl? You don't really understand it at all. There's some indication that he is slightly off in relation to her, when they're playing charades or whatever that game is, and he's trying to get him to call the girl a woman, and he can't do it. He can't think of her any other way other than as a small child, even though she's a grown-ass woman.
But the thing with Howard and kidnapping Michelle is that if you look at the timeline, he has had someone else down there, another young woman in that bunker before that was not his daughter, that was not Megan.
Right.
And it was before the alien actual invasion, right? Because if we follow the timeline, he gets back to the bunker just in time to be safe from the alien attack. The chemicals that kill the pigs, they escape that. They're in the bunker before those pigs are killed, and the neighbor woman is basically killed.
Yeah.
Which means that he brought a young woman into that bunker at some point before the invasion was full on, before he locked that door for good. So the Uncle Touchy's puzzle basement room was clearly definitely used for another woman before this bunker was being used to its full potential.
Maybe it was just a test run. Just shake it down. See.
Practice makes perfect.
I know we said we would table this, but in some of the extended storyline, they talk a bit, or Howard talks about how he's built another bunker for his daughter somewhere near him or near her in Chicago. It's interesting, that. It just seems like one of those things that just doesn't go anywhere. Is his daughter surviving somewhere else?
Too much.
Yeah, it's too weird.
TMI.
It goes too far. Yeah, it doesn't really work here.
One thing I will, despite the fact that I love this movie a lot more without I'm kind of going way back. But one thing I will say about the extended universe, despite loving this movie more without it, is that it gets you as a fan to do this exploratory hunting like a conspiracy theorist. So you're not just reading about conspiracy theories.
Right.
You are actually doing the work of a conspiracy theorist. So it's almost like the form follows function.
Absolutely. Like you're being forced to think like a conspiracy theorist when
Yeah.
you do like just the work of tying the 2008 film to this. One of the videos you sent me is so detailed, like down to like doing all this forensic work where they're figuring out what month exactly the film takes place in. They're like, well, he was employee of the month in January 2016, which meant he was obviously working at the facility at that time. And then something else takes place in March, and so this is clearly April. And like, whoa, like this is a lot of work.
Yeah.
And it has the same feel of watching a lunar conspiracy video where
Very
they're like,
much
you know, look, here's the line. And obviously, like if you see the sunshine relationship, the way the flag is blowing, blah, blah,
And
blah.
when Paul McCartney died for real, and that Kubrick staged the moon landing. And what's interesting about this is because it's around a work of art, is that the questions about, let's say, the death of the author, when we look at work and try to evaluate it, really overlaps with when we apply these same techniques to political conversations about determining intent of the people we're examining, the people we're arguing about, the forces at work, the unseen forces at work. It's a very similar game to cultural criticism, to literary theory. I mean, these are incredibly similar strategies, and this film's extended universe gets us to conflate those strategies into one.
Yeah, I was thinking about that today because I'm just about done with Men, Women, and Chainsaws, and I was reading it and I was thinking about it. It's like looking for gender in everything is almost the same as looking for the Zionist conspiracy in everything. I mean, you're like, you really have to force yourself to look at everything through this one lens. And, you know, some of the conclusions she draws in the book and, you know, other theorists of various stripes, it's like you watch a movie and, you know, like if I watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre just on my own, I would have never come to any of those conclusions about like the treatment of women or any of that stuff. I would have, at least not until after I had gone to Berkeley, you know, like before that, I was just really responding to the violence itself.
I disagree with viewing things as, say, via gender and Zionist conspiracy theory, because I think that the difference is, if you're a woman who has almost never seen women as protagonists in films, and then there's this genre where women are always the protagonists, if you're a woman, you're going to view things very differently than coming to see Zionist conspiracy theories where you are in a loop of the conspiracy that is against you is something that you are seeking out versus something that is a very normative part of the way that the world is constructed. You know, so, you know, I would never accuse a black person of like, you're always thinking about race. It's like, well, the world kind of sculpts its way around you that way. The world does not force a white person to have to confront the Zionist conspiracy in the same way.
I don't want to like people think that I'm like equating you know, feminist film theory with like crazy right-wing conspiracy. What I'm trying to do here is mobilize, like, you have a perspective, and the more deeply committed you become to that perspective, does it warp your other perspective? Like, are you becoming more hypersane in a specific way? I mean, we all know people who get like really into a specific type of axe to grind, and they only ever see that anywhere after that. You know, like it, and like sometimes it's a real axe. I mean, sometimes it's a really worthy thing to do, and sometimes it's not. But in either case, it can be taken far enough for you to be irritating to your polite company. You know, but in the same vein of that, you could be right. You know, you could be deeply correct. You know, I mean, there were there were people in Nazi Germany who were Jews who were like, look, this shit is bad news and it's coming fast. And there's some people who left and there's some people who stayed, and we all know the history of that, you know? And so it's like, it's interesting to think of it in that real world term, is that there were people who probably left Germany at the right time and their friends thought they were insane.
Sure.
And then they lived. It makes me think about, like, what sort of tools could an average person use to parse out this sort of thing, to make kind of a good decision? Because, like, my wife and I have a security system on our house because we live in kind of a rough neighborhood, but I don't have a 50 cal on the roof because I'm not expecting zombies. You know, like, at what point where are your preparations enough? And
well, even just intellectual tools, we've never been better equipped to seek out the truth and never been more confused as to what it is.
Yeah. There's a question that Emmitt puts at the table, which is like, what would your big life regret be? And it's kind of funny. Like, I love how mundane his is. He's like, I wish I had tattoos all over my whole body. And that's just it. Like, he wishes he was sitting there with, like, Thug Life tattooed on his forehead. And I think it's actually for him a really kind of a sweet moment, that he just thought that was cool and he wished he had done it, and he realized that there aren't any more tattoo artists, so that ship has sailed. And then he asked the question to Howard, and I think he has a really interesting thing to say, which is like, is there anything you regret you hadn't done? He's like, in all honesty, no. I focused on being prepared, and I was, and here we are. And it's interesting to think that, like, his preparation left him without regret, you know?
But what's interesting about that very thing is that he alienated his wife and daughter, and now he has to imprison someone to keep him company.
Yeah. So he should have just read that damn Benjamin Franklin autobiography, where, like, my wife and I talk about this all the time. It's like, do you want to be right or do you want to get what you want? You know, if he had been probably less vocally crazy, he could probably have prepared for this quietly. With his wife and daughter by his side. Or made it fun for them or something like that. Although, who knows? I mean, all over America right now, there's people who are part of this thing. It's called, like, a gray man movement. And what it is, they're preppers. And the idea is that you want to blend in as much as humanly possible so that no one knows what you have going on. So when he says, like, oh, other people knew about this place, other people knew about me in the film, like, people know he's a conspiracy theorist. And, like, my neighbor has a safe room full of machine guns and shit. He's moving away. So if you guys feel like coming there after the apocalypse in about a month, it's not going to be a good place to go because just some regular ass tech people are probably going to move there. But right now, it's like people who know that he has that situation. Like, if it was zombie time, that's whose house I'm going to, you know, so you don't want people to know.
Oh, so you won't be at because I'm going to your place. So if you're not even going to be there, that changes my plans.
Well, I'm definitely not going to be there. I've, like, you know, because, you know, I have my conspiratorial tendencies, right? And then they manifest in things that seem quite normal, which is owning weaponry that would allow you to hold off people. Owning, you know, so, you know, I'm not as far gone as, like, a Howard or something like that, but to me, I believe that civilization is extremely fragile and that in the event of an earthquake or something like that, there could be trouble. But what's really actually heartening is I read this book called The Disaster Diaries, which is this dude who, he's like one of those immersion journalist guys, and he wrote this book about getting prepared for disaster and he, like, what you would need to do. And one of the things he found in exploring these disasters all over the world was that people actually kind of come together. They're actually pretty cool to each other. Like, one of the safest places to be is around other people after a huge disaster. Like, people come together. So this whole Walking Dead idea,
which,
is
nonsense.
Yeah, like, maybe eventually, once power structures are in place, like, once people have organized the survivors into groups with different goals, maybe then you have trouble. But it doesn't dissolve immediately into, like, fucking Bartertown out of nowhere. You know, like, for the first couple months after a disaster, people are pretty helpful to each other. Yeah.
I think that's something we'll be exploring on our Walking Dead episode if we ever bother.
Man, I don't ever want to do a Walking Dead episode.
Yeah?
I used to kind of want to do it, but I feel like that show is so lazy and so disrespectful to its fans at this point that it just doesn't deserve any sort of actual conversation.
So maybe we just covered it.
Yeah, that's it. Fuck The Walking Dead. I mean, Daryl Dixon forever, but fuck The Walking Dead.
And Carol.
Carol too. But
I love Carol more than Dale.
Me too. I think, but together, I think they're the super troop.
Totally.
Yeah. Because Carol, like, kind of is the gray man. Like, that's kind of her deal. Like her power is that she's so non-assuming, and I think that's kind of a cool thing. Like I love the idea of in our last newsletter, I had that link to the Reddit Battle Wagons Reddit page.
Fascinating.
Yeah, like people who just take their Volvo wagon and make sure it can run back roads. Like, that shit is crazy to me and super fun. Like, and to me, you don't want to look like an obvious NRA dude. You don't want to look like anything. You just want to be able to blend in and survive.
Yeah, well, real practicers of black magic don't wear pentacles on their fucking necklaces.
No, they do not. They work in marketing in Silicon Valley, like myself. So, okay, if you were locked in this dungeon with Howard and you were sitting at table with everybody, what would your regret be? Like, if you were like, right now, boom, today.
Oh, we're talking about me now?
Yeah, you. Just like, if you were like all of a sudden tonight found yourself in a bunker and the world was attacked by aliens, you could say no regrets too, like if you did everything you wanted to do.
In a certain sense, like I wasted a lot of years of my life. But at the same time, like where I sit now is really great. So like whatever it took to get me here is fine. Cause I've never been happier or in a better place in my life. So decades wasted, got me here.
Yeah, you'd be in the same bunker either way, regardless of what
It's true,
done.
right? Yeah.
I think for me, I would have wished I had gotten LASIK surgery. Because after a couple of days, these disposable contact lenses aren't going to work in the bunker.
That's your big regret.
I'll be fucking blind.
It's LASIK surgery.
Well,
I think okay. Well, if we're going to talk about that, I wish I'd gotten my chest hair lasered off in my early 20s. That's my biggest regret.
Do you think you're going to need to be like a sexy dolphin in the apocalypse?
This isn't about pie. This is just about like self-esteem, which is more important to me than weapons. So because all I have to do battle with is my charms. So
that works. I mean, it works for Emmitt for a little while.
Yeah, works for Carol in The Walking Dead.
Yeah. She bakes a cookie and then murders your ass. I love that plan. I liked that this film had the actress she plays Ramona Flowers in Scott Pilgrim Saves the World. So she has the whole manic pixie dream girl street cred.
Yeah.
But there isn't an ounce of mumblecore in this movie.
Thank God.
Like, it is not a mumbly movie.
No. And it could be because it's a small cast.
Yeah, small cast, like girl with a bob.
Personal stakes.
A cool classic actor that can be ironic when he wants to. Emmitt has a beard.
Yeah. Losery.
Yeah, I mean, there's not any of that. And then, man, I wish I had worked this in earlier, but I had this note that the end of this movie felt like somebody in Hollywood decided to finish on the tits of a cool little indie movie. I don't even know what that means.
You were so high when you wrote that.
Oh, super high. I mean, I feel like I'm wondering if we should make my notes public to people because they're just so goofy looking. Like, surprises abound and are interesting. Like, what was I thinking when I wrote that down? Like, why is that in here? But I think, like, one of the things, maybe this is a good spot to end. One of the things I really appreciated about this film is the amount of thinking it made its fans do. Like, with the Extended Universe game and stuff, it's been really fun to engage with the writing and theories of the people who were fans of this film.
Yeah.
And, J.J. Abrams, Bad Robot, and the whole, like, Cloverfield crew, I think they're making something really special. And, I think it's so interesting that, the director of this film started off with a podcast. He was a famous podcaster, and he got Kevin Smith on his show. And then Kevin Smith started a podcast because he was on this dude's show. And then he made a short based on Portal, which is based on a video game. Dude's a gamer, and he made a fun little thing. And within a couple of years, his passion and enthusiasm for genre films, he's in the big leagues now. You know, he directed a fucking Cloverfield movie with J.J. Abrams, and it was good.
Yeah.
You know, and this is to me in the way that I think of the triumph of Kevin Smith and the triumph of the fans. Like, this is a triumphant fan movie for me. And somebody, like, I identify probably more as a fan than a critic, really, even though I went to college and took some critic classes and whatnot. Like, to me, that's how I approach a lot of this stuff at first. And to see the wonder and the enthusiasm of this community rewarded with more and better films is really heartening, I think.
I'm worried, though. I just really hope that robot makes good on the promise that it's making, because I think if we pull back, what we have is Cloverfield, fun movie, pretty good. 10 Cloverfield Lane, great little movie. Expanded universe that has promise that brings them together. But I think that if you pull back, all we really have is a bunch of scrambling information that's leading to the promise of a bigger universe. Like, the universe as of yet is not that big, and there's not much there yet. I feel like what it is that future films will continue to tie this together, and there will be more text and more game and more conspiracy and more that we can sink our teeth into and get immersed in. But there has been so much of a history of failure of trying to do that in all media.
Yep.
But specifically, like, again, Lost, I think, was exactly a failure of that, of having a blown open labyrinthine text that never makes good on the promise of what it's setting up. It was just a bunch of people groping around, throwing signifiers in the air, without an idea of where it was going. And the excitement of the chaos carried it through until it fell flat on its ass at the end, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm worried that this Cloverfield universe could very easily do the same thing.
Yeah, much like our current administration carried through by enthusiasm and chaos and falling on its ass.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
Absolutely.
You know, I feel all that. I think you're totally right about all that stuff. But even with all of that, if this movie or this universe simply allowed innovative, fun, clever little movies to, like, sneak into every theater in America because Cloverfield's attached to it, I think that's kind of a win. Guy Ritchie was just on Joe Rogan's show, and I know we brought up Joe Rogan a lot on the show, but he's like bro Oprah, so, you know, it's kind of inescapable. But he talked about I
love that Joe Rogan to you is inevitable.
Yeah, of course. You know, he's our guru, I guess, now for all of us who take supplements and, like, fighting people. But Guy Ritchie talked about how there's this whole game of, like, his new King Arthur can't come out this weekend now because Guardians of the Galaxy came out this weekend. So he's like, you can't just have a good movie anymore. Your movie has to be attached to a brand. And so when I thought about that, I immediately thought about Cloverfield, and that you could have 5 or 6 movies that weren't actually connected by a real timeline, but were connected by the Cloverfield brand in the way, like, Twilight Zone episodes are. And I think that would be pretty fun and pretty worthwhile.
Yeah. Although, thinking ahead, the way I'm afraid this can all fall apart is that if there's going to be more, so we have Cloverfield and 10 Cloverfield Lane, which are, quote, blood relatives on separate reality timelines. That means if there's a third movie or TV series or whatever, is it on the same as the other, or does it explain the time slippage? Because does this mean that these aliens slip through time? Where's the answer that's going to be even remotely satisfying that accounts for the fact that I think it was just like there was a monster movie and then they got this other property and we're like, oh, this will make a good surprise, it's a monster movie, but we don't actually have to account for the first one, so we'll just say they're on different timelines. But it's like, yeah, but if you keep going, suddenly there's the issue of timeline and issue of alternate realities that has to be accommodated, which is probably going to be addressed in The God Particle, which is going to be the third movie to come out in this series, it seems. But again, it could so easily just not deal with it in a very interesting way.
Well, check this out. Gunslinger's coming out.
What's that?
Well, it's the Stephen King book Gunslinger.
Oh, okay.
And in the world of the Gunslinger, all of Stephen King's novels are sort of connected by this like metaphysical reality within the Dark Tower series. And so you have the character Randall Flagg, which pops up in Eyes of the Dragon, The Stand, the Gunslinger series. He's going to be played by Matthew McConaughey. He may or may not be a couple different characters. The aliens at the end of It and Tommyknockers and all that stuff may or may not be connected. And there's the Dark Tower series sort of functions as the hub at the center of this universe, and all these narrative spokes kind of go out in all these different directions. So that, like, Stephen King has sort of laid the groundwork for a universe that does behave that way. Connected, not connected, pseudo-connected. Like, it's an interesting thing, and I think that they could probably pull it off like this. And, you know, the director and J.J. Abrams both talked about, like, potential for a video game tie-in. Like a really big, explorative, like, Myst type game or something like that would be really fun for this.
Yeah, totally.
Which sucks for me because I don't want to fucking play video games. But it's where I lose my nerd cred from, is I don't like playing video games.
Yeah, I like playing them, I just don't.
I'm like powerless to them. I pretty much almost didn't graduate high school because of Doom. So I just, since then, have not wanted to play them at all.
Yeah. Shall we fade to black and roll the credits?
Why not?
Tell them what to do.
All right, people. If you listen to this episode and enjoyed it, please go over to iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube, wherever you think that you might be able to manifest our vocal presences in your life, and give us a 5-star rating. 5-star rating is important because it represents the 5 points of the pentacle, and our eternal dark souls will be pleased by your sacrifice to us. And if you're using iTunes, it is quite a sacrifice. We apologize in advance.
Thanks for your efforts. And see you next time for Black Swan with special guest Phonique. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.